Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about the development of substance use disorder. We will be reviewing aspects of substance abuse. The first part of the review will talk about the substance. So, a wide variety of substances can be abused, each with its unique properties and effects. We're going to talk about the route of entry. So, substances can enter the body through various routes, each affecting the speed and intensity of their effects. Effects on the body. Substances affect various bodily symptoms, leading to a range of short-term and long-term health issues. So let's start with alcohol use. Commonly known as alcoholism, alcohol is a central nervous system depressant found in beverages such as beer, wine, and spirits. Route of entry. Normally, it's ingested orally through the mouth. The effects. It can produce relaxation and reduce inhibitions, but it can also cause impaired judgment and coordination issues. Opioid use. Opioids are a class of drugs that include prescription medication like fentanyl, morphine, and oxycodone, and illicit drugs like heroin and illicitly made fentanyl. The routes of entry are oral, so through the mouth, intravenous, which would be IV injection through a needle, or inhalation, which would be smoking or snorting. The effects can provide pain relief, which is a lot of times what it's prescribed for, and euphoria, but they can also lead to drowsiness and respiratory depression. Stimulant use. Stimulants are a class of drugs that include prescription medication like Adderall and Ritalin, over-the-counter drugs like caffeine and tobaccos, and illicit drugs like crystal meth, crack, and cocaine. Route of entry. So oral, so you can take it with pills, capsules, or liquids through your mouth. Intravenous, which would be IV injection with a needle, and inhalation, which would be smoking or snorting. Effects. Increased alertness and energy, but they can also cause anxiety, insomnia, and heart problems. Cannabis use. Cannabis is a psychoactive drug derived from the cannabis plant, commonly used in forms such as dried flowers, edibles, or oils. Routes of entry: inhalation, smoking, dabbing, or vaping; oral, edibles, capsules, or drinks; sublingual, tinctures or sprays; topical, creams, lotions, or patches; dabbing, which is using from concentrate. So the effects can produce relaxation and euphoria, but it can also cause impaired memory, coordination issues, and anxiety. Inhalant use. So types of inhalants are volatile solvents, which are liquid forms like glue, paint thinners, gasoline, nail polish remover; aerosols, so sprays, spray paints, dust off; gases like butane, propane, nitrous, or oxide, not nitrous oxide, otherwise known as whippets. So, routes of entry. You can huff it, which would be soaking a rag and inhaling. You can sniff it, which would be directly inhaling the vapors. You can bag it, bagging, spraying, pouring into a bag and inhaling. There's also ballooning, using nitrous oxide in a balloon and inhaling it. Effects. Inhalants cause euphoria and dizziness, but can also lead to confusion, nausea, and organ damage. Okay, so the stages of addiction. It's really important to understand that normally substance use progresses through predictable phases. Each stage is characterized by increasing physical or psychological and social consequences, making it harder to stop. Understanding these stages helps identify where interventions can be most effective to prevent addiction or support recovery. So here are the stages of addiction. The first stage is experimentation. So this is initial use, often out of curiosity or to relieve stress. So this is, maybe when you're a teenager in your 20s or 30s and you try a drink of alcohol for the first time or smoking pot. Regular use. So So this is stage two. It's become more progressive now. So substance use becomes a habit and occurs more frequently. This might look like maybe having a drink every day after work or binge drinking on the weekends. Risky use. Substance use begins to cause problems, though the person may not recognize or acknowledge them. So stage three is maybe you get a DUI for your drinking, or maybe there's some sort of relationship issues. Maybe your significant other and you are getting in arguments about your use or about things you did while you were using or things you're not doing. Dependence. This is where the body and brain adapts to the substance. This is when we are talking about the reward system getting hijacked, resulting in tolerance and withdrawal symptoms. So this is where you have to have it every day. So this might look like withdrawals in the morning from alcohol. So you drink in the morning so you don't have withdrawals. This might look like intense cravings when you're not using every day. And then the withdrawal symptoms, we'll go over withdrawal in the next training, but this looks like shaking or in a really intense space seizures. So stage five is addiction, compulsive and uncontrollable substance use despite harmful consequences. So even though you're fighting with your significant other or you have 3 DUIs, you continue to drink and drive, or you continue to drink because you've gotten to the place where your tolerance is so high and your dependence is so great that you can't not have it in your system, or you experience withdrawal symptoms or very uncomfortable feelings. And your brain structures have changed. So you've had impaired parts of your prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of the executive brain functioning, and those neural pathways to your reward system are requiring more and more to make you feel happy. So it becomes compulsive. So after addiction, we look at what happens to people when they're thinking about recovery. When we get so deep into our addiction, something happens. It's called rock bottom. You don't have to hit rock bottom in order to stop addiction, but many people do. And people's rock bottom looks very different. Some people lose everything and end up on the street. Some people may get a DUI at their rock bottom. It kind of depends on a lot of different factors. So this is the final stage of addiction. It's normally severe consequences like health crisis, relationship loss, financial ruin, legal troubles, and profound hopelessness. While it's often a turning point for seeking help, early intervention prevents the worst outcomes. Some rock bottoms might look like overdoses or health crisis, like with alcohol. You can get uh, cirrhosis or hepatitis, social isolation. So this can cause mental health issues, homelessness or financial ruin, legal repercussions, and loss of self, loss of purpose. So we're going to watch a video on substance use disorders.
Let's consider drugs. I'm also going to call them substances. And as you know, there's a whole bunch of different drugs and substances that people use. Some of the most common ones include alcohol and tobacco, but also there's a range of other ones, including cannabis, opioids. That includes things like heroin, also things like stimulants, and that includes things like cocaine and amphetamines, and a whole bunch of other things, including hallucinogens, and that includes things like LSD, inhalants, hypnotics, sedatives, and other things. And let us not also forget one of the most commonly used substances, which is caffeine, commonly found in your mug of coffee or tea. So when we look at drugs, when we consider drugs, there's several things that we have to also kind of look at. So we have to consider what happens when drugs enter the body and also what happens when they exit. And these are two different processes. The first process would when the drug actually goes into a human body, we can actually call this intoxication. And that's when the drug exerts its effect on somebody when it goes into their body. And if it exits after a period of prolonged use, we may experience something called withdrawal. So, what are we talking about when we mention intoxication? We're talking about both the behavioral and psychological effects of the drug on the person. And these can be very much drug specific. So, can we think of some examples of intoxication? Well, let me give you a couple of examples. When we're drunk, that's an example of intoxication with alcohol. Or when we describe somebody as being high, that again is a lay colloquial way of describing when someone is intoxicated with another substance, which may be something like cocaine or heroin, for example. So what about when the substance actually exits a person? Well, withdrawal happens when we stop a substance, stop taking a substance, after having taken it for a prolonged period of time. And what happens there is that we get withdrawal symptoms, symptoms of stopping the drug. And these symptoms can make us feel quite sick or ill, and in some cases can be quite dangerous or potentially fatal, depending on the drug. And when I say drug, I should also say substance here. That's a more formal way of referring to it. And both intoxication and withdrawal, the effects really vary on the precise drug that or substance that we're using. But let us also think about drugs or the substances in a different way. Let us think about them on their effects on the human brain. Well, we know these substances can actually result in a whole heap of other conditions because they can result in something called substance-induced disorders. So these are conditions that are actually caused by substances. And these are conditions that could be substance-induced mood disorders, disorders of mood, either experiencing moods that are too high, like mania, or moods that are too low, like depression, disorders related to anxiety, sleep, sexual function. We may also get problems with something called psychosis, which is a loss of contact with reality, and that's where people can hear voices or see things, or become very paranoid. Now, when these drugs affect the brain, something completely different may also happen. We can actually have the development of a substance use disorder. Now, not everybody that uses a substance develops a substance use disorder, which basically implies that when they use this drug, the way that they're using the substance or the drug is causing them a real degree of impairment. It's really affecting the way that they function in their life, whether that's at school, work, or home. Their drug use is really impairing. Now, let us talk about substance use disorder a little further. Because when we talk about substance use disorder, the main issue that we are looking at is that there is a problem here. There is a problem with their substance use. And again, not everybody that drinks alcohol or smokes cigarettes or uses illicit substances, not everybody has a substance use disorder, but some people do. So let's have a closer look at this. So how do we know they have a substance use disorder? One of the ways that we can find out is by looking at their use. And there's really important factors that we need to consider here. Are they using increasingly large amounts? Are they experiencing increasing craving or strong desires to use? Are they spending more and more of their time recovering from or trying to get the substances? Are they failing to try and cut back or cut down? And also feeding into this use issue, are they experiencing problems related to their obligations at work, at school, at home? If these things are appearing, that really does suggest that maybe there is a problem and maybe they have a substance use disorder. A second factor that we look at, apart from use, is the presence of something we talked about earlier, and that was the presence of withdrawal. Now, this is something that happens after you stop using the drug after prolonged or sustained use, and you can feel pretty sick or unwell with different symptoms depending on whatever drug you're using after having stopped the drug. And this really also suggests that so physiologically you're dependent on the drug, your body's dependent on the drug. And withdrawal can be dangerous. For example, alcohol withdrawal. you can get seizures potentially and die. And withdrawal symptoms are specific to the substance. So again, the presence of withdrawal suggests that you have a problem. Finally, the last thing I want to mention is the presence of something called tolerance. And what tolerance is, let me graph it out for you. If this is the effect and this is the dose, the effect of the drug decreases with subsequent doses. Your body adapts to or builds a tolerance to the substance. So what people do in order to overcome this tolerance is they tend to keep increasing the dose or the amount of the substance that they use in order to achieve the same level of intoxication. So as we can see, the way that people are using and the problems that they are encountering with the substance, the development of withdrawal symptoms and the development of tolerance all suggest that we have a problem. And actually just having a couple of these, such as craving or withdrawal or using increasing amounts, not being able to cut down, is enough for us to be able to diagnose a substance use disorder. And there's different severities of substance use disorder from mild, moderate to severe. The one caveat I would say is that caffeine, of all the drugs that I've mentioned, with caffeine, we cannot develop a substance use disorder according to the current criteria. Now, that may be an arbitrary thing, but I just want you to know that.
All right, so let's talk about this video. Khan Academy is such a great resource if you ever want to know things. So, substance use disorder characteristics. The video talked a lot about different aspects of substance use disorder, from intoxication to withdrawal to substance use disorder to substance-induced disorders. So substance use disorders are chronic and relapsing brain diseases, as we've talked about, and they're characterized by an inability to control consumption despite negative consequences. So let's talk a little bit about impaired control. Repeated substance use despite negative consequences demonstrates a loss of impulse control. Let's talk a little bit about the physiological symptoms. So tolerance, which is something we've talked about, but it's needing increasingly larger amounts of a substance. And withdrawal, symptoms upon reduction or cessation of substance use. Negative consequences often are seen as harmful impacts on relationships, employment, and finances. And then risky use is continued substance use in hazardous situations, like drinking and driving. So we're going to transition over to a skill. We're going to talk about, how do you recognize the stages of addiction? Well, let's talk a little bit about them. So the first stage, experimentation. This is occasional use driven by curiosity, peer influence, or stress relief, with no noticeable negative effects. What might this look like? A college student drinking a few beers with friends during a weekend barbecue. And maybe they were influenced by peer pressure. Maybe the beer was just sitting around. Regular use. Substance use becomes part of daily routines. Individual may use to cope with emotions or stress, but consequences are still minimal. Example, a parent has a glass or two of wine every evening to cope with the stress of parenting, but notices no major issues. Okay, let's move to risky use. Noticeable consequences, neglect or responsibilities or safety. Increased use leads to visible consequences like missed responsibilities, risky behaviors, or strained relationships. This might look like a worker drives home after drinking heavily at a happy hour, risking a DUI. Dependence. Signs include tolerance. Remember, that means needing more for the same effect, withdrawal symptoms, and reliance on the substance for normal functioning. So an example of this might be a chronic drinker starts needing alcohol in the morning to feel normal and avoid shaking hands, which is a withdrawal symptom. And the last step, addiction. This is compulsive use that dominates behavior with severe physical, emotional, or social consequences, yet the person continues using despite the harm. An example of this could be a professional keeps drinking heavily, ignoring liver damage warnings from their doctor, and distancing themselves from loved ones. So let's take this as a scenario and see what this might look at, like for a mobile crisis worker. Okay, so here's the background. We're going to talk about James. The Mobile Crisis Unit is called to respond to James, a 19-year-old college student living at home whose parents report he has been acting erratically and neglecting his responsibilities. They mention he often smells of marijuana, spends long hours in his room, and has started skipping classes. Recently, they found empty liquor bottles hidden in his backpack. James initially denies any issues, saying, "I'm just having fun. Everyone my age drinks and smokes. It's not a big deal." However, during the conversation, James admits he's been feeling anxious and using alcohol and marijuana to cope with the pressure of school and social expectations. So let's talk about some objectives for the crisis team. Goal 1, identify which stage of addiction James is currently experiencing based on his behaviors and substance use patterns. Goal 2, educate James and his parents about the stages of addiction to foster understanding and encourage intervention. Goal 3, create a short-term plan to address James's substance use and connect him to appropriate resources. So let's start with assessing James's stage of addiction. The team uses the stages of addiction to evaluate James's situation. So we'll start with experimentation. James likely began with occasional use out of curiosity or peer pressure. Let's look at regular use stage, his current behavior. Using substances to manage anxiety and stress suggests he has progressed to regular use. Risky use stage. His skipping classes and hiding alcohol are signs that substance use is negatively affecting his relationships and responsibilities. A team member might say, "James, it sounds like you've started using substances to help with stress. Have you noticed any changes in your relationships or how you feel when you're not using?" So in this question, the team member is really assessing, are they at the risky use stage or the regular use stage? Assessing, this is a continuation of the assessment. So the team uses the stages of addiction to evaluate James's situation. We just did that, sorry. Educating James and his parents. This is the next step, right? After you already asked the question to figure out where he lands in the stages. The team explains the stages of addiction to James and his parents to help them understand the risks. Team member might say, substance use often begins as experimentation, but over time it can become a way to cope with stress or other emotions. This can lead to risky use, where it starts interfering with daily life, like skipping classes. They emphasize the importance of early intervention. The team member might say, catching this now is important because with the right support, James can learn healthier ways to manage stress before it escalates further. Developing a plan. The team works collaboratively to create a plan. For James, explore counseling services for stress management and substance use education. Recommend attending a peer support group for young adults, such as a SMART recovery group. For the parents, provide education about setting boundaries and monitoring substance use. Share resources for family counseling to improve communication and support. The team encourages James to reflect on his goals. Team member might say, "James, what's one thing you'd like to improve in your life right now? We can help you take steps to get there." Outcome. James agrees to attend a local support group and schedule a counseling session to address his stress and substance use. His parents feel more equipped to support him after learning about the stages of addiction and the importance of intervention. Okay, so most likely you wouldn't get a mobile crisis call for something that small, but it's a beginning to way to understand how to assess the stages of change. So let's talk a little bit more about James and how we analyzed his behaviors to figure out his stage of addiction. So we looked at the different stages and we tried to figure out where he fit and came up with an idea. And then we asked him which stage he fit in by assessing his risky use. Was it risk or was it just habitual use, right? So we then looked at his motivations for use and the impact on his responsibilities. So, what role did educating James and his parents play in the intervention? Well, it helped reduce stigma and motivated James to consider healthier coping strategies. How did the plan address both immediate and long-term needs? Immediate needs were met by connecting James to counseling and peer support, while family education ensured continued support from his family. Okay, so let's talk about the key points. So we talked about types of substances. So we went over the various substances and the different effects they may have and the impact on the brain in different ways. And we also talked about the stages of addiction, and understanding the progression of addiction helps identify warning signs and intervene effectively. I hope this was helpful. Thank you.